everyone. So today I'm going to be presenting a webinar on how environmental design can impact and be used as a tool for conflict mediation and resolution. So to begin this webinar, I just wanted to go through a quick outline of what this webinar is going to be doing and what I'm going to be discussing. So the main question is, what is conflict mediation and resolution? The causes of conflict, varying different power dynamics, looking at it on the micro level, then upon the macro level, and various solutions. Now, I'll give a bit of a brief outline of this. My role and my experience in my academic life looking at conflict resolution caused me to look at various different ways in which conflict mediation has occurred on the micro level, looking at environments such as the workplace, and then applying that outwards and seeing if we can apply those on the macro level, and how the environmental psychology in one space may be used as a tool in the other space. So just quickly, I wanted to do a quick outline of what conflict mediation and resolution is. So, as noted here, mediation is a conflict resolution process in which a neutral mediator assists the parties through constructive discussion and negotiation of their issues in order to reach a mutually acceptable resolution. And I think this is a good synopsis of what a conflict mediation and resolution is. However, it's important that the two are almost interchangeable. To mediate something, you hope to resolve it, and it is a process that involves both, and I think that's really, really important. So from the original webinar that was we did about 2 weeks ago now, I had this video. However, there's difficulties in recording, so it did outline some of the main causes of conflict, but these are shown in slide 4 or slide 5. So these are differences in opinion on both small and key issues, and this can be in the home, this can be in the workplace, or on a larger level. It can also be a variance in understanding, so two different people, two different ideas on what should be done, or two different ways in which they've understood a problem. And then applying that on a more outward level, you have traditional historical disagreements. These come in more macro level, so you're looking at the way in which two communities may have had conflict in the past, or the way in which this conflict is manifested today and may be viewed somewhat differently by different parties. So, there's issues with power dynamics as well, something is important to consider when looking at conflict. So, power dynamics is defined as the study of how power is negotiated in social and professional exchanges. So there's power dynamics in nearly every aspect of your life. You go to work, there's a power dynamic between you and your superiors, and then there's power dynamics between those. There's also power dynamics in the home. So a child will have a power dynamic with his parent. Perhaps even a husband and wife might have some kind of power dynamic. You will definitely have a power dynamic with maybe something along gendered lines. So these are important different issues, and those must be resolved within the environment itself. So moreover, these can be expanded and placed upon communities and peoples. So if we're looking specifically at ethnic and cultural minorities, there's clear power dynamics within a society if you are a minority group. And I think that's a really, really important thing to discuss, and a key issue when looking at how the environment itself and the society in which that environment exists allows conflict to continue, most likely because of a power dynamic that the majority has not considered. So the first way in which I wanted to look at conflict in the micro level was to look at it in the workplace. So there's lots of factors that impact conflict in the workplace: excess noise, lack of privacy, overcrowding of people, but also ideas, if you're looking at it in a more ideological way, but also a lack of understanding on certain viewpoints. All of these cause conflict, and they've all been seen to be a major commonality within the workplace. However, there have been ways in which people and studies have outlined that you can reduce conflict by exacerbating more environmental factors, maintaining privacy for individuals who need it, cutting down on noise and overcrowding. These are key things that you can do. Now, can we expand those out? Before we look into this, I think it's important to look at the idea of lockdowns and the impact that they're having. So as noted here, the home now almost becomes the office, school and living environment in one. As of the 5th of November, the UK will be going back into lockdown. So it's important to discuss how this is going to change going forward. If we are only existing in one environment, of course it's more likely that conflicts will occur within that environment. As noted here, there's no way of separating various aspects of life, and this is likely to lead to more conflict. So some solutions on the micro level. You need a quiet and peaceful environment because it's essential to any form of mediation. You can't have some chaotic background to mediation, because once that person leaves, or those people leave that environment, they're most likely going to revert back to the state in which they were if the environment they go back to is chaotic. It's also important to demonstrate in the micro level that debating is healthy. Conflict itself on a small scale can actually be beneficial. However, it's good as long as it doesn't lead to major conflict, and this is the key discrepancy. Furthermore, it's important to ensure that various communication channels are present within the different spheres, because this allows for people to address issues earlier on, which leads to open dialogue. Now, if you have that and you have a common sense of people knowing I have a problem with this, therefore I can go to this channel to discuss it, you're more likely to have an environment that is beneficial and healthy, as opposed to toxic and full of conflict. So now looking at conflict on the macro level, there's various conflicts around the world, and these are due to historical, cultural, or political differences, and at times more than one, or most likely more than one as well. So the question posed during my research was, what can we learn about how these conflicts are settled by applying solutions that we've just looked at on the micro level to the macro? And if this can be done, what academic research could be done in the future to support it? So some of the key causes of conflict on this macro level. So you have battle for resources. That is probably the tale oldest of time. If we both want this piece of land, or we both need this piece of land, and two communities are going at it, they're most likely going to be in conflict with each other. There's also this idea of cultural differences. Conflict is caused a lot of the time by differences of opinion on certain key issues. And then there's also this idea of a varied understanding of regionality. If two different communities have a different understanding of land and who that land belongs to, then you're most likely going to have conflict of some kind. Now, how can certain environments elicit conflict resolution? Now, it's important, firstly, to take away power dynamics. Use neutral settings, such as in a different country, or a country that is acting as a mediator. Perhaps something, if you're going to take an example, you could if you're going to use the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, for example, you wouldn't have any kind of conflict resolution coming within that state or those two states. You would do it via a third party, much like what happened with the Oslo Accords in 1993, I believe. It's important to take away these dynamics. Another way you could do this is by allowing for amnesty for impacted perpetrators of violence. So let's say someone who is been coerced into fighting, if they have amnesty towards what's happened, they're more likely to want to deal with conflict resolution and conflict mediation. So you have to create an environment through this by allowing that amnesty and creating a sense of environment around them that is comforting and allows them to discuss what happened, as this will allow for resolution and mediation between two groups moving forward. I also think it's important to understand that conflict is both communal, it happens to a group of people most likely, but furthermore it is also deeply personal. And what environment that can be used to then harbour a response from different people is important to consider. You can't have a one-size-fits-all approach, because not only will this disenfranchise a lot of people who they don't believe it does suit them, then you're most likely probably going to have a return to violence at some point. I also think it's important to understand the importance of not destroying culturally relevant sites. An example of this is in Belfast. However, if you are not destroying sites during the conflict, you allow for mediation to happen much more easily, because even though people may have gone, the society that you were attacking in the first place has a lot of the remaining environment left, and that allows for people to transition back into an environment that they may feel more comfortable in. And an example of the first point is the theoretical Jeningaba Peace Park that could be used as an environmental mediator for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, this peace park was proposed, and by my estimation, seems like a fantastic way in which individuals from both sides could come to an environment that facilitates and almost pushes a peaceful message of conflict resolution and mediation upon them. I think this example could be used in lots of different settings. Even though I just mentioned it's important to take people outside of the zone in which they have that conflict, it could be important, once that conflict is over, to then have some kind of mediation zone within the state, so that if conflict does arise, you can then have that discussion in a place in which the environment encompasses the idea of peace. And this is something that could be considered when ensuring that the environment is peaceful moving forward. You allow for the space to be open. It ensures dialogue and makes sure that that dialogue itself is free flowing. You do not want people to feel constrained. Moreover, the environments in which some people exist are constant reminders of conflict settings. If you go back to a community or your town and buildings have been ruined, it's very difficult to forget about the conflict, even if you feel like it has been mediated. And this actually is key if we're discussing cultural genocide, or the idea of individuals destroying certain things in order to ensure that that society itself can never return to a place that it was. You can't mediate conflict after that because the society itself is not going to want it, and the environment itself does not facilitate it. So I think it's really important to understand that the environment itself has to be maintained during a macro level conflict. Furthermore, one way in which I understood that the conflict can occur via the environment itself and how you can get rid of this is this notion of separation, by separating not only people but families from each other. So the implementation of walls is only deems to separate people and create a hostile environment. And the image we have on the PowerPoint slide here is that of the USA-Mexican border, the southern border of the United States, separating individuals. And I think this environment itself not only facilitates conflict, but it's more likely to lead to conflict moving forward, with people trying to climb it and most likely either getting turned away or being viewed as something that they aren't. And finally, another thing that the environment has to consider is that you get closure from this conflict. Conflict can only seem to disappear if the community or the individual moves away from it. They don't linger with that sense of being wronged or feeling as if they have some sort of anger towards an individual. That's not mediation. So it's in a meaningful way to establish the conflict has ended. You have to ensure this closure. Therefore, in some instances, it may be viable to use the space itself as a tool to allow communities or individuals to gain that. Closure itself could be something like, say, the Gabon Peace Park. Any individual who leaves that space or who is in that space has to acknowledge that they have closure from the event that caused them to have conflict with another person or another community. It also might be important to have separation from a place, because this may allow for a superfluous mediation in a sense, but it could also really ignite passion if that person goes back to the conflict zone. So an example of this would be using traditional transitional justice mechanisms or something to that extent. To conclude, I thought it was really important to discuss this topic because I think it's academically viable, but also important in how we understand the range in which environmental psychology can be used moving forward. I also would like suggestions from the audience or individuals who might hear this on what they think. Do you think that applying micro-level approaches to the macro is viable in terms of conflict resolution through environmental psychology? Or do you think that there are other options that I have not considered? Please let me know. Thank you for your time.